Hey everybody, it's Gina here from Gina Makes It. Welcome back to my channel and welcome back to another video. In today's video, I'm going to be exploring the New York Public Library public domain. This is an area that I like to explore when I am looking for specific book pages or illustrations. And so I just type those words into my Google search and I click on the link and I'm brought to the digital collections page. I click on that search digital collections and I'm brought to the main page of the New York Public Library digital collections. So there are over 1 million items that they've digitized that we as the public can sort of sort through. Now they have it organized in a bunch of different ways, very much like the other public domain sites that I've already talked about in my video last week. They are organized by collection, as you can see here, and they're also organized by items. Here are the over 1 million items. That seems a little bit daunting to sift through, so I'm going to go back to that main page and I'm going to type in a keyword, and my keyword is going to be illustrations because that's mainly what I'm here for. The first thing I want to do to filter is to click that box in the upper left-hand corner that says I'm only looking for public domain images. Once I do that, I'm going to click on this children's book illustrations, which is just a collection that they have gathered nicely for you to kind of browse through specific children's books. And you can see there's almost 2,000 illustrations to choose from. And on the left-hand side, it's organized by book title, which I kind of don't like just because unless I'm sure of what type of book or the name of the book that I'm looking for, I don't know if that will specifically help with browsing. So I'm going to go to the top and I'm going to click on the filter button, and that's going to allow me to filter by topic. I like this way better because it's like I'm searching by keyword within a keyword. So within illustrations of the children's book collections, I'm able to assign another keyword that I want to use to kind of pull out the image that I'm looking for. So for this one, I'm going to select the borders option right here just to see what I can come up with. And it gives me all sorts of illustrations that have unique borders as deemed by the digitizers of the New York Public Library. So I see one right away that I know that I'm going to like. So I click on this, and it is a contents page from a children's book, and you can see it is really quite stunning. I love it. I can see that middle part being used for journaling, but I want to scroll down and show you that I can view all the pages in this book and view it as a book. So you can see right now by just clicking on view as a book, I'm able to see every page, every illustration inside of this book, and by clicking that right arrow, I am just scrolling through the book and I can download any of these individual images. Now look at this baby's bouquet. Oh my goodness, that is just beautiful. I love that so much. And there's also, as a part of this book, this illustrated sheet music that is just so beautiful. So I'm going to go back and I have got to download this contents page. So the downloading portion of it is underneath, and it's this green box. So there's different levels of sizes, and I'm going to click on the original because that's going to be the biggest size. And you can see here it says everything's free to use. There's always a little note underneath each image that indicates whether or not it's part of the public domain. So it's going to open up the image. I'm going to right click. I'm going to navigate to the folder that I want to save it in, and then I'm going to name it, and I'm going to save it. And then I'm going to hit my back button, and I'm going to go back to the original page. So at this point, if I wanted more pages in the book, I would just do the same thing. But I'm going to go back to the collections page. I want to see what type of other illustrations they have that aren't children's illustrations. So once again, I'm typing in my keyword illustrations, and I get to this page. I only want to see the public domain images. That's really important to me. So I click on that, and you can see there's all sorts of different images that come up. I'm also able to sort by topic. So I open this up, and I think I'm going to select flowers. So I select flowers because I'm always looking for flower illustrations. It's like a never-ending quest, and you can see there are all sorts of different flowers. Now, it's not just pulling from like botanical images, it's also pulling from children's books. So the first way that we were filtering was just through children's books, but with this one we're actually filtering through all of the illustrations that have flowers, both children and non-children. So I'm just scrolling down here, and you can see there's just sort of an endless amount of illustrations, children's, botanical drawings, all sorts of just beautiful, beautiful images. So once I get down to the bottom, I'm going to go to the next page because I want to see what else there is. So once I'm on this second page, I immediately zone in on this image right here, and I'm like, okay, I gotta see what this is. So I click on it, and this is part of the rare books division, so you know that's right up my alley. And this is an absolutely gorgeous old rare book. I'm not even like waiting around. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna download this right now. This is amazing. So you can see there's the title, there's the year that they believe that it was published, and then there's also another image in this specific collection, and it looks like it's the cover of the book itself. So I click on that, and there's this gorgeous book cover that accompanies that open spread of that book. And so I know right away that I'm going to be saving these images, and I'm going to save them the exact same way I just saved the other one. I click on original, I right click on my image, I do a save image as, I navigate to my folder, change the file name, and there we go. And I'm going to repeat this process with the other image that is in this specific collection, this open book. So I click on it, I navigate to original, I right click on my image, I navigate to my folder, I rename my file, and it gets saved exactly where I want it to be saved so I can retrieve it later. So once that downloads and is nestled safely in my computer files, I go back to collections and I type in a different keyword. In this type, I type in garden, and you can see there are lots of garden images. I make sure to click that box in the upper left hand corner because I only want public domain images, and I'm going to filter by topic. So the first topic that I select is songs, and you can see there are all of these very old and very vintage sheet music covers. They are just beautiful, and I forgot that New York Public Library had these. I had downloaded a bunch of them a while ago, and it just reminded me when I clicked on it how many sheet music covers they actually have here. So this one is from 1899, and not only does it have the cover, but it also has the sheet music itself in case you're looking for sheet music to use in your journals and whatnot. So I'm going to download this, and once again it says it's free, just making sure it is free, and I'm going to download it, and I'm going to right click on it just as I did before. I'm going to navigate to that folder that I want to download it to. I'm going to rename it, and it's going to get safely downloaded into my folder. So even though I could probably spend a lot of time on this page, I go back to the topics section at the top, and I want to filter by a different topic. So this one, remember, our main search was garden, and then we filtered by song. I'm going to this time filter by clothing and dress. So it's in the third column at the top. I'm going to click on that clothing and dress, and you can see it pulls all sorts of garden related images that have clothing or dress in them. And so this one, I really liked the image, so I thought, oh, I'm going to save this one. And so I go ahead and I click on it, and I see, wait a second, this has a whole sub collection called costumes. So real quick, before I lose this one, I do a save as, and I get that saved onto my computer. And then I'm going to go back and just kind of peruse this sub collection, this costume French sub collection. And you can see when I click on it and then I click view as a book, there is all of these French dresses, images, illustrations within this one sub collection. There's that original one that I downloaded, and it's just really shows you how endless this whole process is. And I know that I keep saying that, but the public domain is so vast and wide that if you don't go in it with a specific purpose, you can spend hours upon hours looking and researching and downloading. And I personally find it quite enlightening. But if you have things to do or you have a schedule to stick to, I would definitely try to keep my searches filtered so I don't get sidetracked. One thing that I do like to do is if I stumble across something that's not really within my focus right in the moment, but I know that I'm going to want to revisit it, I do write it down so I can revisit it at another time. Now you can see in that upper right hand corner, you can actually go to specific pages within what they're calling that book. So if you want to jump around to take a look instead of scrolling back and forth, you are free to do that. So that was just something that I stumbled across that I thought would be interesting for you to see. Now I'm going to do a little bit of experimenting with Google Docs and with Adobe Photoshop. Now, I got a few comments in my last video that people just don't like Adobe Photoshop for whatever reason. I think it has to do with the paywall that they've recently implemented, where you kind of have to pay a monthly fee versus where you just used to have to buy the program outright. So I do have Adobe Photoshop, and I don't mind paying $10 a month to use it. It's something I've always used, but like I said, I do like to use Google Docs as well. So this is that open book image that I originally downloaded. And so I'm just taking a look at it to see how I want to utilize it. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is see how I can alter it in Photoshop really quickly. I'm not doing this so you can get a tutorial on Photoshop. I just want you to see the difference between what you can do in Google Docs and what you can do in Adobe Photoshop, and it might actually surprise you. So I'm just going to start fresh with a new file. I'm going to copy and paste my image. I'm going to clean up that background. I'm going to get rid of that gray background, and that's something you definitely can't do in Google Docs. This type of image manipulation is really only for a graphic program. Google Docs is a word processing program, just like Microsoft Word. So you're not really able to manipulate individual images the way you are in Photoshop. So I'm just going through and I'm removing the background very easily from this photo, and I'm going to do a little bit of image color correcting. I'm going to use the prompts that they have, which is sort of automatic prompts versus trying to do it myself. So I'm doing an auto tone, I'm going to do an auto contrast, and I'm going to do an auto color. And you can see already the difference between the original image that we downloaded and the image that Adobe Photoshop is giving us. Now I don't like that, that's too green, so I'm going to go back to that auto tone image and I'm going to save it as a JPEG just like that. I'm going to do the same thing, or try to attempt to do the same thing in Google Docs that I just did in Adobe Photoshop. Now, it's not going to be the same. I'm not going to be able to remove the background, but I am going to be able to do a little bit of color correcting, and I'm going to see which one I like better. So here is that Adobe Photoshop image. I just dragged and dropped it right inside of this Google Doc, and I'm going to rotate it and I'm going to print it. So I received a tip on my last video about if you select one of those farther options on the right where it's like the image is above the text or behind the text, that you get a little bit more leeway on your page where it doesn't bump around as much. And so I'm experimenting with that, and I'm also just going to rotate my image and resize it, and then I'm going to print it. Next, I'm going to drop the original image that I downloaded from the New York Public Library into a new Google Doc, and I'm going to try and edit it in the same manner. Now, I'm not going to be able to remove the background, but I am going to be able to do a little bit of color correcting, just like I did in Adobe Photoshop. Now, if I was going to be prepping these images for professional sale in Etsy or on my website, I would definitely not use Google Docs to do that. I would have to use some sort of an imaging program to get those images up at a high dot per inch. So the resolution at least should be 300, and I don't know if I can ensure that in Google Docs because, again, it's a word processing program and it just doesn't lend itself to that type of graphic manipulation. So here is just that image that I pulled from the New York Public Library, and I'm just printing that out. I'm not doing anything to it, and I want to compare the two images. So the one with the gray background is the one that I printed from the New York Public Library, and this one is the Adobe manipulated one. Now I'm just showing you that I printed it on some cotton linen paper, and I used the premium matte setting on my printer, so I got nice full color, and you can see the one from the New York Public Library is muted and it's yellow and it looks kind of foggy, whereas the one on the right, the one that I manipulated it in Adobe Photoshop, it looks deeper, it looks a little bit cleaner, but I'm going to cut them out to see how they look side by side that way too. So again, it's pretty much the same thing. You could really see it once it's cut out because that white space is gone. It's more of a muted image. It looks a little dirty. The one on the left that we manipulated in Photoshop, it looks deeper. It looks a little bit cleaner. But I'm thinking that maybe I can achieve the same sort of deepness of color if I do a little bit of color correcting. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to select image options, and then I go to adjustments in my right hand column, and I'm going to leave the opacity as is because all the opacity does is make the image see-through, and I definitely don't want that. So I'm going to start with contrast because I know that if I pull my slider to the right, so I get a higher contrast, the color is going to be a little bit deeper. Now if I would go to the left, the color would be a little bit lighter. So I'm going to leave it right here at about 18, and I'm going to print this out and I'm going to see how this compares to that Adobe image that I color corrected automatically. So here we are. Here is the original image that we did nothing to in Google Docs. It's kind of muddy, it's yellowed, it's kind of foggy, it's not very clear. Then we have the Adobe Photoshop one, and now here we have the one where we slightly adjusted the contrast in Google Docs, and you can see it's much better than the original that we downloaded from the New York Public Library, but it's just not as deep as the one that we manipulated in Adobe Photoshop. To be sure, I'm going to give it a trim to get rid of that gray and that white space around the border and compare it side to side. So here they are side by side, both of them trimmed, and you can see the one on the left is the Adobe Photoshop and the one on the right is the edited Google Docs one. So you can see there's a deepness in the Photoshop one right there inside of that flower that we're just not achieving that deepness of color in the Google Docs one. But I think maybe if we increase the contrast just a little bit more in Google Docs and maybe also slightly adjust the brightness, because up to this point we haven't touched the brightness at all. So I'm going to experiment with changing both the contrast just a little bit and changing the brightness just a little bit as well. And I think maybe the balance of the two might achieve a nicer outcome. So I'm going to spend some time looking at that inner part of that flower to see how that changes as I'm sliding my brightness up and I'm adjusting my contrast. I'm also aware of the book border on the inside because I don't want it to get too light. Right now it's a very light purple, and I want to make sure that it doesn't kind of get overexposed as I'm pulling that brightness out. So this is really just a matter of moving the sliders up and down until you really feel like you've got a nice looking image on your hands. So I feel like I'm there. I'm really happy with the way this looks. So I'm going to print it and I'm going to compare. So we're back at the table, and here is my final image, my most recently edited one. And wow, what a difference from that last one even. So it's like each time we go back and change it, there seems to be a great difference. Now look how much darker the one on the right looks than the one on the left. And then here is the two. The left is the Photoshop and the right is the Google. And adding a little bit of brightness, I actually think I might like a little bit more than getting that deepness inside of that flower. But I'm going to give it a trim just to make sure, because that border does play a huge role in how it looks side by side, because it's casting a shadow of darkness onto it. And so now we have all of these trimmed images, and you can see the border, the difference in the actual book, the purples that are different based on the different changes that we made to them. So we've got these two. The one on the left is the Photoshop, and the one on the right is the first Google Docs that we created. I'm going to put that to the side. And now we have the one on the right is the Photoshop, and the one on the left is the last Google Docs. And I have to say, I really like the way the brightness adds to that image on the left. And even though we don't have as much darkness, we have a little bit more lightness on the petals of those flowers. And I just really like the way that looks. Now, our book border is a little bit lighter. It's not as darker. We have a little bit of overexposing on the right hand page. You can't really see those stains as well, but I think that I'm happy with the way the image looks on the left, and I'm not going to care too much about the right because I'm going to do journaling on the right as it is. And so I think I'm going to use the Google Doc image instead of the Adobe Photoshop image, which might surprise you. Now, as I said before, I definitely don't think that I would output the Google Doc image to sell because I don't really know what the resolution is. And if there's a way to find out, if somebody knows, you can definitely leave me a comment. I just don't know if there is a way because it is a word processing program and not a graphic program. So I'm going to do the exact same thing with the cover. I'm going to use this image that I already did a little bit of editing to, the same way that you saw me do with the other one in Photoshop. That's the one without the background, the one on the bottom. And for the book cover on top, I am just doing a little bit of image control in Google Docs. And mainly I'm looking at the texture of the book itself because the book is embossed. And so I know that when I'm doing the color correction, it's going to make some of the embossedness of the cover stand out more, and some of it isn't going to stand out. Now you can see the one on the right is the Photoshop one, and the one on the left is the Google Docs. And while I think I like the color better on the left-hand side, you can't see the embossing as much as you can with the Photoshop one. but I'm going to give it a trim and I'm going to see how I like it. I was pointing out there that if I was going to sell these images, I probably would do a little bit of correcting for that black smudge that's on the cover because it looks a little dirty. It looks like maybe it was an accident. So here you can see them side by side, both trimmed up. And I have to say, even though the embossing is more noticeable on the darker one, the Photoshop image, I think I like the Google Docs image again a little bit better. Now, I just want to say that if I really wanted to, I could achieve that same color in Adobe Photoshop without using the predetermined color correcting. I could do it on my own. I was just using the predetermined ones just for the sake of time and just for the sake of demonstration. And I guess my conclusion is that you can achieve a nice image using Google Docs, not having to have Adobe Photoshop. But if your intent is to sell digitals, then you definitely cannot just use Google Docs. But if you're trying to create digitals for your own use because you want to customize them and you just kind of want to expand your creative process, then I say go for it and just use Google Docs because it really is quite amazing what you can achieve. So right now I am just using these two images for a journal layout, and I am going to create like a little book inside of my journal. The first thing I'm doing is just putting down some scrapbook paper on the page, and then I'm trim off the sides and the bottom and the top because I definitely don't want that hanging over on to my journal. And I thought this blue paper was nice because it kind of pulled out the blue of the bird. So the next thing that I am doing is just gluing the cover on top of the folded image, and I had folded the book backwards because it made it easier for me to fold it the right way, and I did add a little bit of ink to the inside just to give it a little bit of depth. So now that I glued the cover on, I'm just going around the edges and trimming it up so everything is nice and even and there's no white paper sticking out on the top or the sides, because that's really important. You just want to trim it up so everything looks very, very even. So I decided that I'm just going to glue it right down in the middle of this page, tearing the crease a little bit just to give it a little bit of an old world effect. Now, I don't really like the way that left-hand side looks, and so I want to cover it up with some lace that I have in my stash, and this is just regular lace. It's not vintage or anything. It's just from the fabric store, and I liked how white it was because I felt like it went with the cleanliness, the sort of clean look of all of the images and the bright colors and the scrapbook paper. So once I get this lace glued down, I'm going to glue down the entire book right in the middle of this page, and it does sort of not lay exactly flat on the page because of the lace, so I'm just going to put a big heavy book on top to make sure that it dries nice and flat. So I know that I want to adorn the cover somehow. So I have these little paper daisies that I got from Hobby Lobby in my stash, and I thought that they were a nice little embellishment to the cover, and I think I'm just going to add them in a row underneath the birds on the bottom. But I'm trying to find some inspiration for this cover since it's kind of an oval cover. So I go onto my Pinterest account, and I had recently pinned some of these quotes that I really liked, these sort of retro collages, and so I'm just getting some inspiration from them. And what I got was to add a white bow at the top of the picture and to glue the flowers in a row in the bottom. I'm just threading a button with some floss, and I have floss that matches the cover exactly, but I felt like that blended in too much, and so I decided to use a darker purple floss, and once I get that in, I think it provides just the right contrast to the cover, and I go ahead and glue it down right on top of that very complicated bow that took a little bit of time to get right. So once again, I'm using my heavy book to keep that button down, and I am just going to do a little bit of journaling on the inside. So I always plan to write some thoughts down on that blank page, which is why I wasn't so concerned with the way that it looked, if it was too yellow or too muddy or what. So I finished all of my journaling, and now I'm just adding the final touches. I'm putting a little twine bow underneath that beautiful bouquet. I'm adding some dried flowers to the top of my journaling, and then finally I'm just going to trim that bottom page so there's not so much of that paper hanging over, and there's just a tiny little border of scrapbook paper all around. I really hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, if you can please like it and add a comment, and then that way more people will be able to see this video and benefit from using the public domain and altering images in Google Docs and Adobe Photoshop. As always, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.